individual with a really special story. And this is something that is treasured by so many, their family history and genealogy, but it's not always easy to capture. So kudos to Dr. Grossnickle for the hard work and the team building that he has done in creating not only a visual history with beautiful photographs, but a very, very thoughtful remembrance of someone so special to him. So I would like to, at this time, just let you know, the next special program I have coming up is a family heirloom recipes from the Illinois State Fair. One of our Humanities Speakers Bureau, Illinois Humanities Speakers Bureau speakers is coming, Catherine. She's going to present on the 30th, and you can, sign up on addisonlibrary.org for that. Lots of other things on the website, and the new program guide is out, and Don's listing is in the new program guide. So stop by, pick one up, or check it out on the website. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Susan English, my co-host extraordinaire, and she'll more introducing.
Thank you, Jody. The Historical Society is pleased to be a co-presenter of this program this evening. Back in September, I got an email from one of our members, a certain Alice Smith, alerting me to the fact that a former Addison resident had written a genealogy of his grandmother. And so, and that I should look into it. And so fortunately, the library was still open at that time. And guess what they had just received in their collection? This particular book, My Maja. So I was able to get over there. I think I was the first person to take it out of the Addison Public Library to check it out because it was not quite in circulation yet. And the reason, of course, Alice knew about it is that she assisted Don on this project by serving as his editor when it got to the publication stage of all of the research that he had done on his grandmother. So again, thank you, Alice, for bringing it to our attention. Yeah. And I hand it over to you so you can introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Jody. I think I have a new grandmother, and her name is Maja. And I think Don is allowing me to adopt her. Really, I have never had a grandmother close by. And so I know this lady now, and I can't wait for all of you to meet her the way Don will describe her today. Don and I are colleagues from Addison Trail High School. I really need to tell you that he was my boss. And he was a good boss. He was a good boss. Somehow or other, we would never have thought that we would have connected this way. But it was exactly a year ago at the beginning of COVID and the shutdown that Don sent me a chapter of his book. And he said, if you're curious, go ahead, take a look. Well, I was curious. I love words. I love to do things associated with writing. And so I took a look and I got hooked. So I said, Don, do you want me to kind of put a dot here and cross a T there and do a little editing? He said yes. And that was the start of it. So Don is very, very, very amicable. He's going to be telling you a lot about this beautiful lady. And I know I have to tell you, it was very nice to work with him. So Don, I want you to say something about yourself now.
Well, thank you, Alice. Thank you to the audience for joining us this evening. The background here, I'm coming from northern Sweden virtually. Alice is coming from the Caribbean, and from wherever you are coming, I'm saying in Swedish, välkommen, to meet Maja, to dig into book writing, the actual story of Maja, a grandson's tribute. We're going to also, I think, try to dig into the question of what do you do with photographs and pages of history, stories? How do you weave it all together? And so I think with those three goals in mind, to help you understand about my Maja, about my tribute to Maja, to help you maybe get a little bit inspired what to do with your own family tree. And also, I think, dig into the process of book writing. So with that introduction, Alice is going to kind of act as the facilitator. We've prepared some slides to keep the show moving along. We hope you enjoy this evening's presentation. And I think we're going to ask Alice to give me the first question.
Well, Don, here is, a symbol of Sweden. It says Välkommen. Can you see the slide?
Yes, I surely can see the slide.
Why don't you go ahead and describe what it means to say welcome in Sweden?
Well, pretty much the same in any language. Welcome, and you're invited. The Swedish dollar horse is kind of a classic. The flowers, of course, are just a very nice spring invitation to our audience. And I'm grateful to Jody and Susan for inviting me this evening. So let's get on with the presentation, Alice. We've got so much to talk about. There's our book. Alice likes me to point out right away that the illustrator, Jen Nebel, incorporated the Swedish flag on top of Maja's beautiful hat, and down below the American flag. So getting started, we want to kind of claim that my Maja is the story of a Swedish American. And my association with Maja is that my family certainly is very proud to be Swedish Americans. So by the end of the presentation, you'll understand why I wrote the book, why I was compelled to write the book. You'll learn about this beautiful lady, Maja, and I think probably get a little bit inspired, I hope, to address the question, what should I do with my family tree? What can I do? For me, why did I write this book is a question Alice has asked me many times. Why did I endure what I endured? Alice is, by the way, the 5th editor of the book. Also, why did I choose to call Alice? I chose to call Alice because Alice is well known in the community for being very assertive to make sure that the power of women is recognized. She's hosted many League of Women Voter meetings, and I've always admired Alice. And quite frankly, the compelling reason that I felt that it was really necessary to write this book is that my grandmother is a hero. She is significant in many, many ways, but yet her story is forgotten. And the story of women, powerful women like Maja, powerful immigrant women coming to the United States and surviving the Great Depression really fill me with righteous indignation. How is it possible that so many of the historians have focused on men and their role during the Great Depression and have left out Maja? Of course, I've got to tell you about Maja. She's my great mentor and inspiration. She was my grandmother for 21 years. You'll get to know Maja a lot in our presentation. I think you can tell she was a very significant person, both in my person and my career, my ministry over in Africa. My Maja is certainly worthy of a tribute.
Well, Don, I know that you've often referred to my Maja as like you were in love with this grandmother of yours. And I know that in your book, you have at least 10, if not 11 letters that you've written to her. Now, this is kind of an intimate thing to share a letter that you've written to somebody you love. So I would like you to explain this for us now.
Thank you, Alice. The photo that you see there is Maja's secretary. When Maja died in 1969, I asked her 3 siblings if I could have her secretary, because over the years I went to stay with Grandma Maja for weekends, and very often throughout our lives, I lived next door to her for the first 5 years of my life. I saw her sit at the secretary and write letters. So the book, actually, some of the chapters have been scratched out on that secretary there, she called it. And my communication with Maja still today, is a heavenly communication, where throughout the book, for each of the chapters, I write to her and express my innermost feelings as an author, as her grandson, talking to her about what I remember and what I miss about her. So in a way, it's very sentimental and it's very reminiscent. From an author standpoint, Maja continues to inspire me. She inspired each of the chapters, and so in that regard, they are love letters from me to Grandma. And Alice has asked me to read. I guess it's a kind of a tradition for authors to read their text. So if you'll go back to the original slide there, Alice,
Yep,
I'll read the text.
I'm going to have to do a little maneuvering here.
Okay.
Come on, Alice, you can manage.
You just skipped ahead a little bit. We can go back. Sure.
Here we go. Alrighty, I'm going to do the slideshow, and from the beginning, one slide, another slide. Okay, Dawn, here you go.
Dear Grandma Maja, how I remember the times observing you writing and reading letters from Sweden. I can still see your smiles and your tears and your eyes passing over the lines sent and lines of letters received. Being away from home and loved ones is very difficult. I cannot even imagine how difficult it must have been for you to be away from your home and loved ones in Sweden. You took on a new culture and traditions while remembering the old country in Sweden coming to America. You are a pioneer. And like Humpty Dumpty, you had a great fall, yet your drive was to build your Swedish American dream no matter what. How did you manage, Grandma? How did you manage? For my entire life, you have been my hero. What is the source of your grit, Grandma? How can I share it with others?
Well, Dawn, you're obviously sharing it with others now, and that's really wonderful. I know that a lot of it began with this little girl, so I'm going to just ask you to focus on her for a while.
Well, that little girl is our grandchild, and her name is Maja. And her mom and dad, Eric and Amy, heard many, many stories about my Maja. And lo and behold, when it came time to give a name to this child, they chose Maja for her name. And so she's standing there at our cabin in front of the steamer trunk that my grandmother, Marie Wittenstrom at the time, married, went back to Sweden and filled the inside of that steamer trunk with photographs and all kinds of relics. And as she was come to America in 1922, originally, she came again after a visit and filled up this steamer trunk to adorn her home in Chicago at 78th and Yates Avenue in Chicago. So it's a special trunk. It's a significant trunk. It's historical. I'm very lucky to have it. Its story is very interesting, I think. When I went to clean out the home of Maja's last surviving child, Linnea, I went to the attic, and there was Maja's trunk collecting dust. And inside were photographs and archives and family history. And kind of coincidentally, I suppose, feeling like Maja has been gone for a long time and she died in 1969, I needed to do something with the contents of that trunk. So discovering it was almost like Maja's ghost saying, Don, open the trunk and share all of the contents with others. I don't want to be forgotten, Donnie. She used to call me Donnie. And I said, yes. And, you know, I have an obligation, Maja, to little Maja. I need to be able to tell her about Grandma Maja. So it was at that point that I think in earnest, I really started working hard to leave behind photograph notebooks, stories that I wrote, recollecting my 21 years of storytelling with Grandma, and also sharing with Maja some of the family history as well. So I had a big job, and I realized that the time bomb is ticking in my own life, being some 70 years old at this particular point in time, that I was designated as the family historian. And if it was going to be carried forward, it was going to be up to me.
Well, I think this picture is just wonderful. And I have a feeling that Maja, your granddaughter, is listening. I think she's there, Don. So we'll have to see her later. Okay.
She is there.
Yeah. Okay.
With her mom, Dr. Amy Lippert, a professor of history, University of Chicago and Northwestern. And kudos to her. She and her husband, Eric, have been very patient listening to the etiology of, how you write, along with all of my family. My daughter, Kristen, has been a great encourager. My wife, Kathy, is the person who put all the notebooks together with the photographs. And I took it from there and decided, to be the creative person I am, processing the family history. So Alice likes to ask me the question, what's the timeline? What's the timeline? And I said, okay, Alice, here we go. 1969. Alice, by the way, is the reason that a book was done, because she provided the discipline for me to get the chapters done, to assemble the chapters. It's a big job to kind of focus one's family history, particularly with all the material that I had. So in 2004, I went to Sweden. 2003, my mother died. 2004, after coming back from Sweden, Linnea came with me. All three of Maja's children were dead at that time. So if Maja's story was going to continue, it was going to be up to me. So 2004, I went to Sweden, and I have to tell you that from the time Maja left Sweden in 1922, the letters went back and forth, and the relatives have been very active. You'll hear a little bit later that Maja took my mother, Dolores, to Sweden when she was 5 years old, along with her husband, Oscar Carl Wittenstrom, to show them off. Okay, so you'll hear a little bit more about that story, but 2004 was significant. And when I came back with photos from the Swedish side, it was time, I think, to get busy. And I think what's in common for you historians and those of you who have family history, kind of like a quilt that we were talking a little bit before we started this evening, you must quilt things together and assemble them and through some kind of organizing theme. So at that particular time, I also started to do research, and I had many different colleagues help me. Sometimes researching here in the United States is really a challenge. Some of the websites are very helpful. In Sweden, it's particularly easy because through the edict of the king, everything that was done from the 1700s had to be recorded by the local Lutheran minister. So the archives are tremendous. And I have a whole notebook full of archives that are filled from my friend and historian, genealogist Lars Lundstrom, who has volunteered and been at my side. And Maja will inherit, all of my family will inherit a great big notebook from all of the relatives back in the early 1700s and what they contributed to family history. So after the research stage, I suppose then the recollecting and writing, 21 years of Maja's stories needed to be written. And why did I need 5 editors? Well, because I kept writing and rewriting and writing and rereading. And the editors told me that it needed a focus. Okay, so I changed editors and it really didn't change the poor writing. So eventually they all added their corrections. The writing hopefully got a little bit better. And finally, when Alice came, she said, okay, Don, it's time to boil this down to about 12 chapters, which she did. She gave me deadlines and helped me. And I'm forever grateful to you, Alice, for helping.
Well,
so I think I won't get into all the details of how This book is self-published through Amazon. Amazon has a publishing company. The layout was done by a masterful layout person, Jennifer Nebel, who also did the cover design. We did decide to put a whole museum full of photos. I think some 30 pages in the middle of Maja's book. And I think one of the things that really impresses me, and you'll hear about Maja later about her wealth, but the photos that she left behind. Now, when you are a wealthy person, you're going to have access to people taking group photos and such. But I really have to thank Maja this evening for assembling history and making it available. And many of them had names and Swedish writing on the back. Many of them don't. And that's really a great problem in recollecting one's family history. But I think we'll move on now that I've given you a good glimpse, I think, of how the family history has been assembled into the book. Let's meet Maja. The photo on the far right is my grandmother, the happy lady with the Swedish hat. She's attending a wedding there. Moving to the middle illustration, that's Maja, probably posed in a portrait studio in New York, sending back to her Swedish relatives. Yes, the $1,000 that she had in her pocketbook coming to the United States on the great steamship that you saw enabled her to probably rent those clothes. But the main point is to let the folks back home know that she was there in America, the land of prosperity, that which attracted her in order to begin her adventure. What is it that is going on in America that attracted not her father, but her father's brothers? They all came to the United States, but her father, August Carlgren, did not come, which is a whole part of her story. She was an adventurer, 25 years old, coming in 1922, the roaring 20s, on a big adventure to probably see what the United States is like before maybe she would return home to Sweden and settle down. Well, you'll hear that would not be the case. And earlier on, there's young Maja in her Swedish costume, in her walk-in fireplace in her home. Maja Källgren, it's pronounced in Swedish, Carlgren in the US, was born to very wealthy father and mother in Sollefteå, northern Sweden, as you can see with the red dot there. Graham, of course, described Sweden as some kind of brigadoon, the land of forests and horses that draw sleighs and skiing, and of course, the land of the Vikings. So throughout my childhood, Maja promised that if I would eat my prunes and do chores around her house, one day she would take me to Sweden. Well, that day never came. But she left behind wonderful photos. On the far left, in the front, is young Maja, her sisters and brothers. Ida Carlgren and August Carlgren had 9 children. 2 of them died at about age 10 of diphtheria. The young man just above August there is Aaron. He died in 1918 of the Spanish flu. So the other children survived, and there's much to be said about August and Ida Carlgren. They had a manor house, a mansion. They had a store that you'll be seeing in the next slide that they operated, a deli, and a meatpacking house, and also a cheese making business. August Carlgren and Ida were philanthropists. They were very active in the local church. All of the children, including Ida and August, worked in the store. So they learned how to be entrepreneurs and run businesses. So seeing this photo is just one of many that allows me to go back in time, that would inspire any person to say, well, what really is going on here? What's the backstory? What was life like in Sweden for Maja growing up?
I know, Don, that you mentioned in the book that the experience she had helping to run this business was then translated to her life later here in the US.
Well, Maya was a person of many talents. Entrepreneur is one of them. Her family history, which is again why I'm so happy to be in Addison talking about the library and also the Addison Historical Society. The family history really inspired her character. And her character meant that since her relatives distinguished themselves so highly and left behind great legacies, powerful legacies of resilience and grit and gumption, Maya and the other children had much to live up to. And you know, if you remember back that slide, look at the clothes that they were wearing. Is so impressive. And you know, I kind of grew up in very humble means. So to think about Maya coming to the United States, one of the big questions is always why? Why did you come? Well, you'll hear she came on holiday, but it certainly led to more than that. She gave up so much to come to the United States to live. And there she is on the left-hand side. Some of her character revealed. Normally, aristocrats like children in the Shelgren family go on to inherit some of the business and invest. Maya decided she was going to become a nurse. And it was really quite significant, I think, that that her nursing background was going to come in handy when she came to the United States. But it reveals, I think, her altruism and her desire to be helpful to others. When I was in Sweden in 2004, I visited a military installation, and there was a bucket with a amputated leg. Um, and it reminded me of Maya's favorite story. I'll go through it very quickly. During nurses training, Maya was asked to assist in surgery for a soldier who had to have his leg amputated. Her job was to hold the leg while the surgeon took the saw and sawed it off. And Maya revealed in that story that her character was tested, whether or not she had the guts and the gumption and really wanted to be a nurse, to put up with the blood and all that was involved. And it really called into question whether or not she had the inner upbringing, she had the desire to do what it takes in order to progress. And that scene is indelible in my memory among so many of her stories that kind of revealed her character. And certainly for me, I've had opportunities in life to examine the question, do I have the guts and gumption, you know, that it requires to thrive? Well, here we are, imagining coming over on the great steamship in 1922. As I mentioned, Maya had a pocket full of money. Her father died of cancer in 1921, which meant that the store and the businesses had to be dissolved. All right. And so I suspect that that had something to do with Maya deciding to come, and probably also grieving. I think with the loss of her father, Maya wanted to know what's next for her. So, of course, when you see a picture like this and coming into New York Harbor or leaving Gothenburg, Sweden, you begin to explore the whole question about immigration. And around the 1920s, you know, Europe emptied its countries in many regards, sending them to the United States, a land of opportunity. So the thing that always puzzled me, in I think it was probably around 2008, going to New York, I visited Ellis Island, and it was very much a spiritual experience for me. Maya never set foot inside of Ellis Island because wealthy first-class passengers had the luxury of the customs inspectors and health inspectors coming on board. Now, second, third, and fourth steerage, on the other hand, you see, were loaded onto tugboats, taken to Ellis Island, and spend what many people describe as a very gruesome time at Ellis Island, inspecting them for diseases, making sure that they had enough money to come to this country. And Ellis Island and this steamship is really kind of indicative for me as an author about the journey. If you've ever studied Campbell, a story about the hero's journey, you know, you would understand what I mean. is that the ship brings Maja to the United States, and there the journey continues. So we'll go to the next slide and get to know a little bit more about what happened to Maja when she arrived in the United States. She went to church, and here's Carl Oskar Wittenstrom, a handsome young Swede from Cadillac, Michigan, who was singing in the choir. Well, Maja wasn't really planning on marrying in the United States, I don't think, but she did. And in 1923, after a very quick romance, she married Carl Oskar Wittenstrom, who came to Chicago to make his wealth on repairing cars. The car industry at that particular time, auto industry, was flourishing. Everybody would have a car. So his idea was to open an auto repair industry, and he did. Carl Oskar Wittenstrom and Maja pursued the American dream. They had 4 children. 3 of them are pictured here. One of them died the day that he was born. This picture illustrates Maja and little Linnea, the younger one there, my beautiful mother, Dolores, and my uncle, Peter August. This picture is taken later because in the next slide, I'll explain a great tragedy happened in 1932. Carl Oskar Wittenstrom, the grandfather that I never met, was quite successful. Maja was a stay-at-home mom for the 4 children. They built this home on the south side of Chicago. This is their automobile as well. On June of 1932, excuse me, Carl Oskar Wittenstrom, probably because his business failed, we're now into the Depression times, okay? We've gone pretty fast, all right? We've gone through the childhood of the children, the marriage, Carl Oskar's business that fails, and Carl Oskar Wittenstrom on a Sunday afternoon fell on the dining room floor, witnessed by Maja and the 3 children, and had a fatal heart attack. And this is what we might call the beginning of book 2. Book 1 is the story of Maja, who comes to the United States and pursues the American dream. And book 2 is now the broken dream, the events and surviving during the time of the Great Depression. I asked Dr. Lipper to write chapter 7 to give the reader an in-depth idea of what went on facing Maja with 3 children alone in the United States with her family back home in Sweden, and virtually no contact with any American relatives, which was very sad and very regrettable. Maja endured a terrible homesick. So she had a broken dream, and the events and surviving it in the Great Depression is really the ultimate character of Maja, and certainly probably why I pay tribute to her. How in the world did she manage? The great question of the book is, what's the essence of Maja? What is it that drove her to be able to live the kind of life that she did? Well, there we are, Black Tuesday, 1929. When Dolores and Carl Oskar and Maja went back to Sweden to show off the young child and her Swedish, 100% Swede American husband, when they returned, as the ship was docking in New York Harbor, this was the time of 1929. So it wasn't necessarily Black Tuesday, but it was the beginning of the terrible time. Over on the right, we see the men pictured. Once again, getting back to my righteous indignation, everyone felt so sorry for the forgotten men who didn't have the ability to feed their children and their wife and their homes, and it was terrible, tough times. Well, it was Mrs. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, who wrote a book. She was a home ec teacher like Alice Smith, and was an inspiration to me. I doubt very much that Maja had time to read it, but in Roosevelt's book, which is fascinating, she tells all the women in the United States that if they do a good job, they can reverse the Great Depression. And lo and behold, that's also a great theme of my book. okay, is that Maja and the forgotten women of the Great Depression actually did probably much more than all the programs of the CCC and the others. But my book is also kind of a way to make sure that Maja's story is not forgotten. Here's the passport picture. Once again, how does Maja smile? The children are not exactly smiling either. They're going to be getting on the ship, a long 11-day trip from Chicago to Sweden. Maja is grieving, and my mother is also grieving. She knew my father. It was a tragedy for all of the children to grow up in the United States with an immigrant widow mom, and very difficult. So Maja takes the 3 children, sells the car, and goes back to Sweden because maybe in her mind she thought she could go back to the manor house. Maybe there was still wealth and money in the bank, and maybe she could live like an aristocrat. But little did she realize that there were other children that were living in the manor house, and that with the 3 little ones running around, Grandma Ida said, I think maybe you should go back to the United States, Maja. The children, of course, were US citizens. Maja had become a naturalized citizen, and things were not great in Sweden either. Europe and many of the countries like Sweden were having their own depression times, and communism and socialism that brought everything to bear today in the socialist kind of environment of Sweden began during that time. And there was great strife. As a matter of fact, I don't have time to get into it today, but a terrible incident happened where soldiers shot and killed many Swedes who were protesting the wages that in the lumber mills. It's a very embarrassing story to Swedes, and it's not very well told. But protest is certainly, not indicative only to the United States.
So at this time, Don, it's good just to review that Maja and Carl had these children and lived the American dream until the Depression. And so that was about 10 years of the American dream that they were living. Then when he died, things obviously changed. Now, when she came back from Sweden, some things happened that were not necessarily nice. Why don't we go into what this slide means?
Well, yes, and as I mentioned, the first 2 books could have finished right then. Okay, had I not discovered in my research 3 family skeletons that Maja kept well hidden. George Bernard Shaw says it very well. If you cannot get rid of the family skeleton, you might as well make it dance. Well, I prayed hard about should I keep the family secrets still secret. I can give you a little bit of a hint of what goes on, but I won't be a spoiler in this presentation. I'll ask you to read the book, and if you've already read the book, you know of what I speak. But Maja had breakdowns and suffered what we would call today PTSD, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And how she survived those is book 3 and the third part of the story. And so if the audience will allow me, I'll skirt over what those circumstances are to allow you to read the book without having a spoil.
Okay, well, there is a reason to read the book to understand what these are. But because of this and what she lived through, Maja had some key words and some key ideas that she lived with. And I would like you to describe this one, Don.
Well, yes, I think that first of all, when Maja would meet with the grandchildren and her 3 children, they would be always ready to kid her and say, Maja, we're sure glad you came to this country. And with a kind of a smile, wondering if they were being sarcastic or trying to be humorous, she would smile most often, but sometimes it would bring her to tears. because the essence of this book really examines the question of how did she do it? How did she endure what she endured? How did she have the guts and gumption and resilience? And it took a while for me to figure it out. So I'm going to give you 3 key ideas that help explain. When I went to Sweden in 2004 and visited Sollefteå myself, I went to the river and saw a statue that's built to these timber floats. Timber float people are very brave men that work in the river in the springtime with poles. And in Sweden, you see much of it is the forestry industry. So during the winter, the trees are felled and rolled down onto the icy river. And when the river melts, the timber floats down the river until hopefully it reaches the lumber mills and then cut into lumber. So in the meantime, however, these trees are not always very cooperative. So they get tangled with each other. So these men called timber floatery get on the logs and balance on the logs with freezing cold water and poles and break them up. And for me, it represents a metaphor that throughout Maja's life, she was like them, very brave, and with limited resources and tools, she would break up the log jams that would complicate her life, and she always found a way through.
That's beautiful, John. Thank you. Here's another beautiful concept.
Well, framatanda is a word, it's a composite word. It has 3 parts, from, at, and then anda. From means toward, an means through, and anda means with spirit and gumption. You know, in Hebrew, we have the word ruha, which is breath. Okay, so framatanda is a word that explains Maja's spirit. So she always had an eye toward looking ahead. She always had the notion that she could get through, and she always capitalized on the spirit of her relatives and God. She was a faithful person to find a way through. Framatanda is one way to explain Maja's guts and gumption.
And then finally, resilience of the heart.
Well, resilience has been a favorite topic of mine for my entire life, my career in working with high school students, finding a way so that if they weren't successful in school, Dave Williams and others would know that we did some things at Addison, and Alice helped, of course, for the students that were not successful, to help them be resilient and to nurture that. Maja had resilience of the heart, which means that the kind of resilience that she had was on behalf of others. And so Maja lived a life basically for her children, for her husband, and also to honor her relatives and mother and father in Sweden.
It's a beautiful theme, and it does run through the entire book. Yeah. Don, I just found this picture of the loggers, and you might just capitalize and tell us a little bit more.
Well, if you use your imagination, the word picture that I gave you, these are the brave men who have spikes on their shoes to keep them on the floating logs. Very dangerous. At times, the log jams would clog the entire river, and dynamite had to be used to break them up. But it's an important image for me. When I went there, it all kinds of came together. I said, yeah, Maja's made out of the same stuff as these men, not afraid to take the risk. And it still is a beautiful image, I think, of the whole idea of Sweden and the tough stuff that the Swedes say that they're made of. I might mention too that while I was researching, I came across what the Finns called sisu, S-I-S-U, which is what the Finns would say is framatanda. Okay, it's the second wind. It's that which enables you to go on when others would give up. So it's a kind of a Scandinavian concept. But when I mentioned sisu to the Swedes, they just about disowned me. They would have nothing to do with the fact that I would even reference the Finn in talking about character.
Well, that tells us a little bit about the culture over there. Well, Dawn, I think that we are making wonderful progress, and this is looks like a lot of traditional Swedish things going on.
Well, it is. I'm happy to show you. That's a picture of my mother over there who never outgrew her desire to ski again. While she was only in Sweden for about a year and a half, she loved Sweden. She forgot how to speak English while she was there. That's what she said, and it made the assimilation back to the United States very difficult. Of course, I was brought up in a Swedish home, Swedish grandmother, Swedish aunt and uncle. Up on the upper portion of the slide, we have Margit and her daughter making peppercorn cookies. Our family has kept in touch with the Swedes. All of our children have been to Sweden at least once. So we are very prideful. My dad even became an honorary Swede himself. The Swedish cooking, of course, there is such a thing of Swedish cuisine. We have Swedish meatballs and, of course, the ever famous lutefisk, the dehydrated fish that comes from the North Sea, sent dry, and then it's dehydrated. It's actually preserved in lye, and so you wash it away. And some people find it to be quite objectionable. My mother thought it was the absolute most wonderful thing in the world. And of course, Good Yule in the upper right-hand corner is Lucia. With fika. Fika, as you know, is one of the famous Scandinavian traditions of stopping every day and having coffee and pastry. And the Swedish buns that are cooked. The oldest daughter comes to the mother and father's bedroom serving coffee every year on Lucia Day. Many traditions. Our daughter Kristen was a Lucia queen here in Chicago. And the traditions continue even to this day.
Beautiful pictures, Don. Beautiful. I like this picture, Don, because it probably is a good way to say that we're almost done with our presentation.
Well, I'm sad about being almost done. I could talk about Maja for a long time, but this picture does summarize, I think, everything that we've said so far. This is Linnea on the far left. That's Grandma Maja, Mother Maja, and her son Peter, and my mother Dolores. Linnea went to college here in Chicago. Peter went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. My mother went to the College of Hard Knocks. She was very proud of her MRS degree and raised 5 boys. But the picture illustrates the solidarity, as I mentioned before, the resilience of the heart. Maja lived to 1956 and beyond, actually till 1969. So proud of her children, and did a good job, they say, okay, of doing what she intended to do, having them be a blend of rugged American individualism and proud Swedish traditionalism. So Maja is boasting here in this particular picture, and I'm very happy to share them and this entire presentation with everyone. Thank you for staying with me so far.
But Don, there's something in the book that I find very unique, and that's the gallery of pictures you put together. Can you mention a little bit about that?
Well, yes, I think the book could have been a lot longer. I think there are some 30 pages of gallery of photos. As I mentioned, I think Maja really wanted to be remembered. The photos that she had taken in studios, the photos that are sent from Sweden, and some of the photos that I have came from Sweden. So the flow of photographs back tell a great story, and I'm really glad Maja's not forgotten through the book and through presentations, like this one. It would be easy, I think, to dismiss her. As I mentioned, when people get to be in their 70s, they have to ask the question. They might ask the question, what do they want to leave behind? Okay, and for me, it was a compelling reason that I did not want to leave her photographs or her story behind, and And I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to assemble the book, thanks to your help, Alice, and others.
You're so very welcome. So, folks, here is a way that you can get a copy of the book. I think ordering through Amazon.com is probably the easiest way. However, you can call Dawn or me, and we can make arrangements to get the book for you as well. It's a nice collection. It's nice to have it in my collection. I'm certainly sharing it with people as I meet people and they ask me, well, what did you do for this Don Grossnickle man? And I'll tell them what I did and then I'll show it to them. So here is, here's the information, and I'm going to leave this up for just a second so that you can make a note of this. I like the fact that this cover is a little bit similar to the signature. This is Maya's signature, is it not, Don? On the bottom of the book.
It is. It is. I was very happy to find that, and very happy to share this particular photo. The many faces of Maja are very interesting. It's as you can see with her fluffy hat, she was quite a character in her youth. You can probably just imagine the spirit that she had that would make her get on that steamship to come over to the United States. She was encouraged by her uncle Albert, her father's brother, who coaxed her and all of the family to come over.
Yeah, exactly. He sent a picture to them in his car with his wife and child in the back seat. They look like they're millionaires, and I think they were.
Well,
So,
yes, that's Uncle Albert. He came to the United States, as folks know, the Great Chicago Fire happened. So you might ask the question, why Chicago? Well, many Swedes were into the building trades. And so he was a construction entrepreneur, and he made a fortune. And as Alice says in the book, there's a picture of a great big fancy car. He did become a wealthy tycoon. As a matter of fact, he donated the grave for Oscar Wittenstrom that he is now buried in.
thank you, Don, for that. Well, it's time to thank the Addison Historical Society and the Addison Public Library again. I think that you guys really have your act together. And by that, I mean the Historical Society and the library get together to sponsor programs. And it really gives us presenters like Don and myself a chance to reach a larger audience. I'm going to stop the screen share now, and maybe it's time for some questions. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment or?
I would. This is Diane. I really enjoyed the presentation. I thank you very much. My family had a totally different way of doing things, but it reminded me, your presentation reminded me of a quick little saying that you may have heard, but it's a favorite of mine. It says a birth certificate shows that you were born, a death certificate shows that you died, but photos tell that you lived. And I think that's what you got there, right there, Don.
Beautiful. Thank you, Diane. Great. Great. And there's other people to thank. I see Pete is there. He was one of my editors, a great helper. Thank you, Pete.
It was a very interesting presentation. I couldn't quite catch the name of the ship that she came over on in 1922.
Oh, well, I think it's in the book. My memory. Maja went back and forth several times. I might venture a guess, maybe somebody knows, but it might have been the Kungsholm.
Thank you.
Well, imagine that. Amy, do you have your little Maja there?
She's taking a bath upstairs at the moment.
Dad's got Maja.
Well, that makes a whole lot of sense that you can be with us. But Amy,
Hold on. Here we go. Here we go.
Here
Hey,
we
Maja,
go.
you want to say goodnight?
that
night. Yes. Good night,
Ooh.
everybody.
Good night, Maya.
They don't stay small forever, do they?
All
Are we
right.
muted? Amy, why don't you, could you just talk a little bit about the chapter that you contributed to the book?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I applaud all the work that you put in, Alice. It's great to put a face to your name. I've heard so much about you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And this is all just a tribute to Don, to your incredible work. My father-in-law is definitely a scholar. I could say that.
Mhm.
I just contributed a very small part of this labor of love on Don's part. I just provided a sort of brief historical overview of the Great Depression, some of the factors that led up to the stock market crash in the fall of 1929. And Don had discussed it with me as a chance to sort of zoom out and provide everyone with this, bigger picture of these large historical forces. And the nice thing about the book is the way that you get to zoom in and sort of zoom out for that moment to think about that moment in history, and then go back into Maya's story and think about the ramifications of those events for her life and the lives of her family and what would become Don's family.
Mhm. Amazing. Amy, is it from you that I learned about the pin money that women were allowed to make and
I
keep?
included that as part of it. I think that should be, I think that made an appearance there. Yeah. Although I'm getting that from my own historical sources, I can say that.
Right, right. So there was something cultural about women going to work during the Depression, because the feeling was you would be taking the job from the man. And so that had to be worked out in terms of a societal factor. But it was okay for women to earn a little bit of money, which they called pin money. And so that would be so they could buy their pins for making the repairs on clothing. And so it's a really interesting little sideline. Only a home economist, a lady who teaches sewing, would pick up on that. But I thought that was an interesting little sideline. Thank you
It is,
so much.
Alice. It
Mhm.
is, Alice. And I think I glossed over pretty quickly. How did Maya make it during that time? She capitalized on her nursing skills. She converted the upper floors of her home into a boarding house. And what you're saying is very valid. Women were very much discriminated against, taking jobs away from the men, except nurses, of course. In those days, and Dr. Lippert is now working, for the American Nurses Association, writing their history as a
Oh, really?
historian. And I found it fascinating that there really weren't hospitals per se. Okay, they were just developing, and even the nursing force was just coming to be. The Great Depression did not treat everybody equally. There were a lot of wealthy people who maintained their wealth, okay, and they could hire people like Maya and many Swedish servants to come to the United States to be maids and other kinds of domestics during even before, during, and after the Great Depression. But yeah, the real struggle for Maya, I think, was to leave home just after the children were off to school. She did have she lived in a Swedish neighborhood. She had a Swedish neighbor who looked after the children until the children went off to school. Then Maya went off to the wealthy home to convalesce and take care of the wealthy until 7 o'clock in the morning. She would take the streetcar back. She did not have an automobile, and then get the children ready for school. And also I could say too, my mother I could have written the book about my mother as well, because she was the surrogate mother, not very old, 5, 8, 9, 12, 14 years old, okay, looking after the other children while Maya went off, which was very demanding. that was impressive, I think, for my mom. And I think that as I circle back, it still grates on me, and Amy has heard this really a lot, how women of the Great Depression have been really pushed aside, okay, for the roles that they played, including what you just mentioned, Alice, the discrimination about work and the poor men. The poor men. I think there's 5 major books written about the forgotten men of the Great Depression. And my how would you say, my ambition was, do you think maybe the My Maya book could at least squeeze a little bit into that memory bank?
Yeah, that's wonderful. How about some other comments or questions, folks?
Real quick, I want to just read some things from the chat because they're worth it. The first comment we got was, I love the heavenly communication, Don.
Thank you.
Talked about writing heavenly to the heavens. Another one was from Eric. Congratulations, Dad, for an incredible tribute. Another from Richard is super. I enjoyed both the book and tonight's presentation. Another one saying how they can't wait to read the book. And what was I am inspired by Don to write a book about my grandparents' very interesting lives in America.
Wow.
They left all of their families behind in Sweden, and that all 4 grandparents had immigrated here as well and ended up in Chicago.
Wow.
And they maybe have known Maya. They may have known her. So I thought these were really great comments.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Clearly, we're all touched by your story.
Don, where did most of the Swedish immigrants live when they came to Chicago?
Oh, great question. Well, let's see. Andersonville is up on the north side, and of course, there's still some Swedes there. The Swedish American Museum is there, Alice, and I have donated a good number of books to the Swedish Museum, who's patronized by the American Daughters of Sweden. My mother was an American daughter of Sweden. I haven't been able to substantiate whether or not Maya belonged or not, but the American Daughters of Sweden supports, and my mother did, you talked about sewing before earlier. My mother sewed many things to raise funds. Our daughter Kristen went to Swedish camp, encouraged by my mother, and had scholarship that was raised by things that my mother made. So I went down to the Swedish American Museum. In fact, I will have a program coming up in a month with the, and I also, a couple museums in Minnesota have invited a presentation. I'm excited about that. But Andersonville is a place where it's a mecca of Swedes in Chicago. Most of the, many of the Swedes, located in Andersonville on the north side. And the Swedish delicatessens are there. So if you like Swedish food, the delicatessens are still down there, where you get your lutefisk and your caviar, your Swedish meatballs. You can go down there. We went there every Christmas time. There used to be a fabulous bakery, the Johnson Bakery, that's now since closed. And yes, the Swedes settled up there, and in big numbers. As a matter of fact, just like you've heard about the Poles, there were more Swedes in Chicago than there were in Stockholm.
Right. During the 1920s and the 30s. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Wow.
Don, were they building the grand homes in Andersonville, the Swedes? Because that's some pretty impressive architecture in that area.
Well, I tell you what, having grown up on the south side, the Swedes that I'm from grew up in South Shore. Okay. South Shore, and the South Shore Swedes were very clannish. So in a sense, there was a little bit of competition between the north side Swedes and the south side Swedes. My father was sponsored by a Swede into carpentry, and became a carpenter because of Axel Soderlund. Svea Soderlund was my grandmother's person who took care of the children, and their daughter Ingrid and Svea Soderlund was a best friend of my mom. So the Swedes, probably, I know you have some Greek heritage, right, Jody?
I married into it, but I've got more
Very clannish.
European, Western European than the
Very
crossroads is Greece, but I'm proud to carry the name. I would want to mention another comment because it's so sweet. Love the communication about Maja. Love the commitment to the past. And this is coming from Jean from 1968 at Illinois State University.
Yeah, Jean, you're
Wonderful.
muted. You're muted, Jean. Unmute you, Jean. Jean has
I'm
been
here. I'm here in Wayne, Pennsylvania to support you and your excellent work, Don.
You're wonderful.
It's a beautiful book and we all feel the love and connection and we like connecting back to our past. We
Mhm.
all enjoy it if we have that kind of DNA.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, everybody.
Diane is letting us know that her aunt was a member of the American Daughters of Sweden. And in the mid 80s, she was on the board of directors, Diane was on the board of directors of the Swedish American Museum until she moved away. And it's a fantastic place. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on with
How
the
wonderful.
culture.
How wonderful. Yes, and I just heard today that the museum in Gothenburg, okay, Gothenburg in English, okay, is closing. All right, and it's a sad thing for me, which is another reason to write a book like this, is to keep it alive. That this museum is closing and selling off all of its contents. Now, Gothenburg was the main portal for a lot of Swedes that particularly took the direct route. Earlier transportation of Swedes immigrating, usually had to go through another port in Europe. But later on, as the steamships developed greater fuel capacities and the number of Swedes coming, they came in the great big steamships. But Gothenburg was the main place, and that's where Maja left from. And there's so much good story about that, both good and bad. The Swedes were taken advantage of there, and fleeced of their money, trying to change their money early, the same kind of stuff that goes on. One image that I have that I want to share with the group, since you're so patient, is, can you imagine the train station that Maja left from in 1922 was located probably a quarter mile away from the family mansion. Can you imagine the people coming down, waving goodbye to Maja? Little did they realize that she would, come back just in just a few years, 5 more years, but that would be the end. And Maja's mother, Ida, died, and Maja she was not even close to being able to go back to Sweden to bury her mother or her funeral. And so the sentimentality of Maja and saying goodbye, and the position of writing these letters home, first it was letters and then it was packages. My grandmother and my mother would be jumping up and down. Oh, it was big news. We got a package from Sweden. A package from Sweden. And then
great.
finally, the telephone came across, and then the Swedish relatives, some wealthy ones, okay, came back and forth several times to visit my mother, and my mother got to go back one time, and Maja went back in 1949, and I'm about to go with my book tour over in Sweden, as soon as COVID will allow me, to go back to the Swedish Museum in Sollefteå and to walk the walk again. My grandmother's home is still alive. Okay, I mean, it's still there, and the Swedish folks have been so helpful. I'm exuberant last week, a person sent me what's called a contra book. Okay, the book of accounting from my grandfather and great-grandfather and grandmother's store that they would write down. The wealthy people were given credit. Okay, so you came into the delicatessen and the servant probably came to the store shopping for the wealthy. It happened to be the postmaster of the town. Okay, and the storekeepers would write down the goods and the cost, and just once a month, an invoice would be sent to them. Some Swede in Sollefteå sent me this contra book that had my grandfather's name, embossed on the front, August Shellgren's Delicatessen, and now I have that artifact, and it's so
amazing.
wonderful. It's so wonderful, but it also poses the question: what do you do with all this stuff? What do you do? And hopefully your progeny, will value it just as much as you do in a sense. But I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to have what I inherited, and so glad that it just didn't die in that trunk up in the attic. It was so close to being thrown away. That would have been so sad.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Absolutely.
Jody's
Well,
trying to
Dawn.
wave. Time to say goodbye.
No, Don, okay, so Dean Cook, do you have a comment or a question?
I just have a question because when I was coming into Chicago for my sister being in pharmacy school, 1966, she took me for a special event dinner to something called the Kungsholm, which means the King's Home, and it honored all the Scandinavian leaders, kings, etc. We had a restaurant meal and we had a theater presentation. Do you remember your family honoring something called the Kungsholm in Chicago?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Okay. What do you recall?
Well, I recall it was very expensive and elegant.
Yeah.
And for a carpenter, and 5 boys, it was above our means. But we went occasionally. There were several restaurants. I believe there's only like 1 or 2 of them left down there that might be open. I think COVID is going to probably have a terrible impact on them. As I mentioned, I was there last week. For all intents, there's another restaurant that I'm quite sure is still open that has a great reputation. It's Ann Sather's. Yes. So yes, Jean, I think
Okay. It was a big
those-
deal. It was my 16th birthday. It was a treat. And I was highly impressed with all the royalty images around the room of all of Scandinavia.
Well, the King of Sweden did come to Chicago. It was a mighty occasion. The Swedish Museum down in Chicago, Swedish American Museum, by the way, is a great resource. I posted, if any of you are interested, I do have a Swedish American Facebook page where I posted, pictures of the Swedish American Museum to kind of invite people to go down. I hope to play increasing. Of course, if my book were selling thousands, I certainly would be making big donations to try to keep the Swedish American Museum operating.
All right, Don, I've got another question here, or actually, a question comment, and then we're going to get to Pete, but I'm trying to keep things in order. Can you please say the name of the town Maja came from in Sweden, and how was it pronounced?
Sollefteå.
And that's how they would have said it.
That
in
is,
Swedish.
that's not anglicized. It is the only way that it's pronounced. Sollefteå. Yes.
All right,
it's,
Pete.
Yes.
Pete's got
Hi,
something
Don.
for us.
Well, thank you
Pete.
for involving me in the project. I was always happy to find the odd typo or grammar situation, especially in other people's work. but very happy to be involved with you on that. And Don knows I also do genealogy, and I found out, Don, that we are half cousins. And we are related through this way. I'm Irish, you're Swedish. We're in the ish line together. So we're half cousins.
That is super.
Pete,
But
I'll tell you,
yeah,
I just want to acknowledge how we met. We met at the Wellness Center. I go there for my cardiac rehab, and I met Pete there. And it's a great story. Pete is an officer of the Northwest Suburban Genealogical Society. All right. And they have been helpful, particularly Ken Seifert, a good friend of mine, has been probably my big connection. For those of you who do genealogy, maybe you're good at the apps, Ancestry.com and some of the others. I am not. Okay. And thank God I had people like Pete and Ken Seifert and Lars Lundstrom and others that really assisted me, particularly for the family research, aspects of the project. And as I said, I would be certainly remiss if I didn't thank my wife. I think I mentioned it earlier. It was Alice always asked me the question, when did the book start? Well, it started when my wife started to take the photos and do something with them. All right. I'm embarrassed to say, for me, it's not necessarily a men thing. Okay. I'm learning. Okay. And regret, and ashamedly, I would say so. But she has been the one that has inventoried and accumulated all those wonderful photographs. And I think I did try to mention that the process of family history, Susan knows this, is it can be quite daunting, overwhelming. And since writing this book, I've kind of helped people say that this is just one way to take one person and kind of focus outward, because it's very difficult. One of my favorite sayings is the hardest part of finishing is starting. So starting somewhere, and I chose to focus on Grandma Maja, and then blossomed out. But I will leave behind notebooks full of photos, notebooks full of all the genealogy, family history, and things that are hopefully going to be more interesting, to others, to take them to the next level.
That's marvelous. That's great, Don. Done a great job.
Any more questions, Jody?
I have one for you. Did you actually use Ancestry.com? In my experience at the library, we actually give access to card holders to Ancestry.com, which is like gold. And I was able to go back with the help of Ancestry.com and findagrave.com and trace my family in the United States to 1760 with fairly detailed information. But just like you said, it gets more complicated. The deeper you get into it, the harder it gets. And you start to think, oh my gosh, I could be looking in military records and I could be looking in census records and getting further and further. So kudos to genealogists, first of all, because that is some serious digging these folks have to do. Don, did you use these, or did you work together with genealogists?
I'm glad you're asking a good library question.
I know I have to ask.
Well, because it's really a very important part of my story. I think when Susan was introducing me, we made reference to me living in Addison. Well, I lived in Addison 24 hours a day as a school administrator, but actually I've always lived in Arlington Heights after college, pretty much. Okay, so the Arlington Library, has been instrumental in helping me, and I would mention two things about that. One is that they bring in a Swedish genealogist who gives free help for the Swedish site. Okay, and I did take a couple, 3 classes from Karen Mead is her name, Kathy Mead, excuse me, and was very useful. Ordinarily at the Arlington Library, there will be people sitting there looking at microfilm, and all I had to do was ask someone if they would help me a little bit. And I got very good help, and they have staff at the library also that can assist. But technically for me, Jody, and it's hard to imagine because I have a doctorate. I should know how to research, but it was a bit over my head. I did get lost at very often, and it was easier for me to ask Ken Seifert or Pete when I got stuck if they could help me. For instance, and I won't give away this because it's part of the spoiler. Okay, but there is a section of the book that was a groundbreaker, earth shaker. Okay, when I asked someone through a Swedish site if they could do a search on a census, I think, and they did. And lo and behold, she also had a subscription to newspaper.com, okay, and researched Maja's name. And lo and behold, 2 citations were revealed to me that I wish I never had seen. And that's a little bit of how the stumbling and walking the journey happens. And if you read the book and look in the book, you'll see the actual photos of the citations that really are still so sad I can hardly even imagine to bring it to mind.
The amount of data that's available now compared to when I first started looking 10 years ago is incredible. The number of records you can access, not fiche, it's photocopies, it's images scanned.
Yeah, digital
yes,
resources.
I know what you're talking about, digging and finding and kind of wishing.
Well, it's branching, and I think, Susan and I spoke about this, and I think the resource of having a Addison Historical Society and folks, the camaraderie that happens among genealogists is amazing. And I think you're absolutely right that less and less, I think, is commercialized, although it does really seem to suck you in, to have memberships and also guide services. And there are many people that you can hire, to assist. But I want to mention, like, all the Swedish newspapers have been digitized now, okay, and that it won't do a non-Swedish speaker like me much good, but there are places like Augustana College that have great resources, and North Central University in Chicago that are centers, U.S. centers, and of course, you probably, anybody who does genealogy knows about the Seventh-day Adventists, the Mormons, but I'll be honest with you. At the moment, I'm kind of taking a break from genealogy. As you start asking questions, questions will come up, and I'm now very happy to be sharing presentations like this with Swede groups that are probably going to be pretty intense and probably grill me pretty hard. But you've been most kind. But I think the Swedes in particular I mentioned, and isn't it astounding that the king made a policy in Sweden that in fact the archives that I have, and unfortunately the printing of the books that I did produce, the actual pages from the 1700s do not reproduce very well. And some of it, of course, was my own research that, the scanning was done poorly. But every time a individual was baptized or confirmed or died or married or left town, went into Stockholm, there's a notation in these books. And so it's just remarkable to look at books in the 1700s, okay, the Swedish books, and actually see, if you read the book, you'll find that there's a reference in there about cemeteries. And you talk about challenges. There still are a couple big challenges that I have about Maja and cemeteries that I want to dig into. And also certainly some health conditions that she had that really are great challenges also. But there's a side, Jody, that says to me, you know, I think maybe I'm as far as I want to go. You know, could I ask for medical records? It's possible, yes. But I think for my purposes, so maybe others have found some of that to be true.
Well, I think you're really setting a standard for us tonight, though, in terms of the depth of research. Eric commented that you have many primary resources, and clearly you do. You know, very academic, very historian, very impressive, and I really thank you for sharing this with us tonight.
Well, Jody, I just can't tell you how grateful I am, particularly to be home in Addison again. I do miss Addison. I don't necessarily miss the challenges of every day. Addison was really good to me. The people, the students, the traditions there. I know the Addison Advantage was invented at a time when Addison was really growing, increasing pride. You know, that to distinguish itself for so many reasons. I'm the library, of course. I was a Kiwanian. So I had connections through, you know, the librarians that would come to meetings. Susan knows my lamentation about I was the curriculum director. Now, how could I have been the curriculum director and not really taken full advantage of the Addison Historical Society and the museum? I should have twisted arms, broken elbows. The social studies teachers should be in there. District 4, my friend Larry Weck, you know, the former superintendent, the junior high principal, Susan Lichty. These are people, you know, that I still will be in touch with, Susan. So you can count on me. Okay, don't make the same mistakes I did, okay? I was not aware, okay, coming and doing that Addison television program with you opened my eyes to the facilities and the expertise to have a top-notch person like Susan, you know, working through the society is very, very impressive. I'm just so sorry I discovered you so late in my life.
Better late than never, Don. Better late than
Thank you.
never.
You're so kind. Well, thank you, everybody. Maybe it's time to say goodnight.
It is.
Thank you, Don. Talk
Thank
to
you,
you again
Don.
soon. Bye-bye. Mhm.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Kristen.
Thank you all so much.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for having it.
Goodbye, Eric. Goodbye, Kristen.